Very honored to have Christian Watson back for the first time since he graduated with his philosophy degree, journalism minor. So you're officially out of college now, Christian. Smarter than most people who've been out of college for many decades. And since you talk a lot on your YouTube channel, and you are on Locals now, christianwatson.locals.com, and we'll give that a shout out later, but just so everybody knows, you have a YouTube channel, we'll show in a second, and you're on Locals, so everybody go follow Christian. You use your well, it's really your brain, and it's not really your training, because I know a lot of philosophy students who are way dumber, but including me. I mean, I have a master's degree in theology and psychology, and I definitely consider myself in the category of dumber than Christian Watson. But since you talk a lot about critical theory, and you're also a libertarian, I wanted to bring you on to talk about this story that was trending because, number one, I want to show you a couple different headlines about it, which I thought were really interesting to see how these organizations were covering it. Because actually, I think the most biased headline comes from the most mainstream news organization. This is KITV in Hawaii, and their headline is "Offensive Honolulu License Plate Still on the Road 1 year later." So they already say it's offensive, like right off the top. Now, if you look at Newsweek, they say FCK BLM license plate. So they tell you what it is and say, instead of saying it's offensive. But then they add seen on car with Trump 2024 sign gets recalled. So they smush those two together. Like, just so you know, the guy likes Trump and he hates BLM. Or it could be a lady. I think it's a guy from what I've heard, but it could be a lady. Gets recalled. Yeah. And then the Blaze, which is openly conservative, Hawaii man refuses to surrender FCK BLM vanity license plate despite warnings from the city. I actually think theirs is the least biased, even though they're probably the most outwardly biased news organization. I thought the local news stations was the most biased headline. But anyway, I was just curious what you thought about this, because I guess apparently in Hawaii, it says that FCK or FKN are automatically supposed to be rejected for license plates. And somehow this quote slipped through the cracks, or no, here, quote, ill-advised oversight. The city and county of Honolulu told the TV station, and they're supposed to be getting it back. They say it was recalled. The owner's supposed to surrender it, but recently people have reported they've seen it out on the roads. So we got to track this guy down, apparently. And basically that's what the article is. Like, this is a reporter, racism on the road. Viewer reported seeing this license plate. Sure enough, quick search, records show this plate was issued in Hawaii. Unclear how it made it through the process. So here you already, I mean, the guy puts a question mark on it, but the headline is, you know, calling it offensive. So I don't know. Just what are your opening thoughts on this story, Christian? Should the guy be able to have this license plate first and foremost? Do you think it's racist? Do you think it's offensive? And how do you think, since you have a journalism minor, how do you think the news is doing covering it?
Well, you're taking me back to class a little bit, because we used to go to a website that I'm sure you're familiar with called All Sides. We would actually look at all of these different articles from all of these different places to see what all these different outlets were saying. And we would there would be a center column, there'd be a right column, there'd be a left column. And I find it quite fascinating that this is what's actually happening in the media. Look, so there's a few things with this. I read more into this story. And the more I read into this story, the more I began shaking my head for a few reasons. Number one, I think one person in response to that license plate said, "We feel unsafe," or "This shows that the Hawaii government does not care about Black people." And I find it rather odd that some people conflate their identity with the entirety of their existence, and they also conflate their identity with the political movement. Both of those things are separate in both cases. A, your identity is merely an aspect of you, and if you didn't have anything to do in the formulation of it, logic would tell us that you shouldn't be proud of it, or you shouldn't be valorizing it, and you therefore shouldn't be sensitive if it might not necessarily be seen as someone else might see, as you might see it by someone else. And secondly, BLM is not merely an affirmation that Black Lives Matter, like some of its supporters like to say. BLM is first and foremost a political movement built upon the idea that Black folks are still experiencing oppression in the United States, systemic oppression, and that no one, or at least the broader society, has ignored them for a very long time, which is not true. You have the NAACP, you have the SPLC, you've got all kind of organizations that have been around since the 70s, long before BLM was even a thought. You got the various civil rights organizations, the ACLU, all that have been there to fight for Black people. I say that in air quotes because all those organizations have their own problems, and a lot of them have done atrocious things, like promoting people like Al Sharpton in the name of fighting for Black people. And I don't think it's really fighting for Black people at all. So the point is, we have a sensitivity problem in this country. We have a conflation of movements with values, with persons in this country. And ultimately, we have people who don't want to engage in the exchange of ideas. Well, if I saw something like that in the road, I would keep it moving because it has no impact on me. It's just an abbreviation of words, not even the full word, an abbreviation of words. And I'm sure if you would sit that person down and talk to them, you may find some common ground on some other issue, or you may not. Point is, that license plate is no reason to be up in arms, what people are, unfortunately, because they're not being rational.
So 2 things. They have a quote from a UH professor, a law professor, this guy Ken Lawson, who they say is Black. If you claim to be the Aloha State, then do something about it. Lawson says the lack of urgency in the case has been a problem. Quote, the fact that you didn't do anything may be more proof that this license plate may be correct, that our lives don't matter, that our feelings don't matter, that these types of things can be publicly done, kind of bringing up what you were saying. And I think what this article does a terrible job of, which is really reflective of the news business in general right now, is sharing the diversity of thought about Black Lives Matter among Black people, like you were saying. Like there are plenty of commentators you could easily find on YouTube. And I'm sure a lot of these journalists are probably aware of them, but maybe they just write them off as Trump supporters. I don't know. But would not agree with this guy. But the way that they build this article is, number one, like, okay, they have a Black law professor basically proclaiming that this is an example of racism and that Hawaii doesn't care if they allow this. But it also is like a beckoning, which I see quite a bit in many instances, totally different kinds of issues, for the media to demand the government do something about it. You know, it's like, we demand that you get this person. We demand this person's speech be reined in. If, you know, that this is, and hey, listen, if it's like, well, this is against the law, it should have made it, fine. I mean, I guess they could argue that we're not doing it because we're against free speech. It's just, it's against the law. And here we are, we're journalists and the guy's breaking the law. But I think that's the other thing that concerns me about the way journalists are more openly demanding government control and action, you know, when it comes to private citizens, and like, we're going to expose them, and even for some of the most inane things. So I just thought that was interesting too. Like, they're not just kind of throwing it out there as this is what's going on. It's like they're building a case for why, if the government doesn't do something and do it now, they're racist and you know, complicit with this person, basically. And they, you know, you should start rounding people up and reprimanding them for doing this kind of stuff. If only that means to just take away their license plate. And I'm fascinated by that too, like that just sort of open call for government control.
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on here. There's some psychology, there's some sophistry from that professor. There's a lot of things going on here. Let's address the sophistry at the very first instance of this. So, as we understand, and this is not an attempt to bias anyone against all professors, but as we understand, academia is a place that cooks up a lot of this resentment and narrative as it surrounds race. Let's go even further. In the 1990s, there was a lady called Mary Matsuda, who's actually one of the ladies who was instrumental in crafting critical race theory alongside Mr. Bell and Miss Kimberly Crenshaw. She wrote a paper called Assaultive Speech. I forgot what the rest of the paper said, but essentially her thesis was that we need to reevaluate the First Amendment and enact speech codes and hate crime laws, or the hate speech laws, to protect vulnerable communities, because vulnerable communities, given their unique experience in the country react to those words differently. Now, you can see echoes of that. That's not exactly what that professor is saying, but that is one of the many ways you could try to, operative term, justify his sentiments. There's a problem with this, and it's a problem that I believe anyone, even without a philosophy degree, will be able to appreciate. Speech is the means by which we interact with the natural world. And it's also the means by which we interact with people in society, society being an extension of the natural world. People think that society is separate. No, it's not. Without the natural world, without all the laws of reality, society wouldn't even have a foundation to exist in the first place. So speech being that means by which we decipher the natural world, it's also the means by which we get to the truth. And it's not simply a means that exists in society. It's not a social construct. Speech flows uniquely from human physiology. There's not a single other mammal in this or being in this world that can produce words like we do. Now, they can communicate amongst themselves, obviously, but we can produce words. We can refine language. We have these very ornate and complex structures. It's beautiful. Declensions, nouns, pronouns, it's all beautiful that came from the human mind. And it all has a natural basis in our ability to speak. When you kill my ability to speak, you are killing my ability to interact with the natural world. You are trying to snuff out the internal dynamic potential within me as a human being to create change or to preserve things. How can I do either without my ability, again, to interface with reality? The truth is, a lot of, and I think you might appreciate this, Allison, a lot of media organizations have very little interest in preserving man's natural faculty of speech, but they would rather repurpose and direct man's faculty of speech towards a certain line of thought. And if you deviate from that, you are no longer doing speech, you are doing violence. This is where the idea of words are violence comes from. And this is precisely, I think, the kind of principle that professor is using to justify censorious behavior. And that's dangerous for our ability to understand the truth.
If you haven't said FCK to bad wine, what are you waiting for? Go to AllisonWinePromo.com and get 50% off some amazing Malbecs from Argentina and 50% off shipping. These are my favorite wines. They come from remote regions in Argentina and high altitude locations. One of the wines, the Rogue wine, is a hand-picked grape wine. Another one is made with natural fermentation processes, and the other one actually comes from almost 9,000 feet, so it's an extreme altitude Malbec. These are not Malbecs that you're going to get at your local grocery store, and why would you want to? Like I said, support my work, go get a great glass of wine, and if you are a coffee or tea drinker, you can also go to twinenginecoffee.com/Allison and support my work there. There's a wide variety of USDA-certified organic, high-altitude Nicaraguan roasts. The limited black edition is processed with honey. It's very good and unique. Check it out. But if you're a tea drinker, you can get the Caturra tea. It's tea made from the coffee fruit that is around the bean. I like to cold brew mine for 24 hours. Tastes a lot like black tea. It's very good. Wherever you are, whatever you're drinking, again, say FCK to bad drinks. Support free speech, support my work, and let's get on with the video. Check this out. In the Newsweek article, one of the last sentences is, the offending license plate has since been recalled, but they don't say anywhere who's offended. I'm just trying to make sure
That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, they have statements from the spokesperson, Department of Administration Commissioner, order to review, blah blah blah. This is Alaska they're talking about because there's other cases like it. Yeah, it just says the offending license plate, like who's offended. And yeah, and I think you're right. There's perhaps intentionally, because I know what my old coworkers are going through as far as training when it comes to critical race theory, but perhaps this ignorance that they have of again, like we said, the difference between whether you think Black Lives Matter or you like the organization Black Lives Matter, that these are two totally separate things that you know, you might 100% agree that Black Lives Matter, and you may think Black Lives Matter is making things worse for that cause, or you may think that they don't really care about Black lives at all, or whatever. Like, there's so much nuance there. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of journalists, maybe that's part of the training. I'm not really quite sure, because I know the training that at least my old company is putting people through has some pretty
Yeah.
controversial figures who would probably agree with a lot of the stuff that was written in this article.
Yeah.
And they're trained that, like you said, if they diverge from that, it's not just having diversity of thought. It is exactly
Mhm.
what you're saying. It's, you are essentially, you're putting yourself in the crosshairs of going to HR at that point.
Yeah.
It's
And
not being a
yeah.
journalist.
Absolutely. And so I think terms like BLM in our culture have delicate emotional cognitive responses tied to them. And I think that's also part of the reason. So half of it is sophistry built upon false principles like assaultive speech, which does not exist, by the way. Violence cannot be speech. They are two separate categories, two separate principles, two separate phenomena. That doesn't exist, but it's popular in academia. And then you have the emotional aspect, the cognitive aspect of it. And so a Black person who is or anyone who has a bleeding heart for social justice, who is under the perception that Black people are under constant assault in American society, is going to have an emotional attachment to their work, to their objective, which would be to get rid of that oppression. And when you respond from emotion, you can get very, very bad results. And so people attach an emotional significance to the word Black Lives Matter. And so the moment you attack that word or that phrase, regardless of where you're doing it from, whether it's genuine racism or whether it's genuine skepticism like me, then you will be considered a threat to Black lives. Now, I want to kind of explore this emotional dimension to it, because there's just one thing that really gets on my nerves. It really gets on my nerves. People use the emotional dimension to accept an argument as a given. So if I were to tell you, Allison, that I challenge the premise of BLM, both the organization and the statement, a lot of folks would say about the statement that I'm being racist. No, I'm not. Let's do a syllogism, okay? A, all human beings have intrinsic value. B, Black people are human beings. C, therefore, Black folks have intrinsic value. In other words, they matter. Now, the first premise from which the second premise flows is that all human beings have intrinsic value. I don't think anyone would dispute that. And especially the second one, that Black folks have intrinsic value, that appears to encapsulate Black Lives Matter. But you don't have the second premise without having the first premise. The syllogism is incomplete without that universal affirmation of human value. So back to BLM. If I tell you that BLM as a statement it misses the first part of where it should come from, and I don't think that's a proper term to use, people will be like, you don't like Black people. No, 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 no. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is I want to affirm the value of every human life indiscriminately. And I'm not going to treat Black folks as these people do, as social justice activists do, as a oppressed class who need a special amount of care. If everyone has universal value, then everyone deserves the same amount of care from people in society, or at least, actually that's not true, because we interact with people differently. On a governmental level, everyone deserves the same amount of care and respect. The government should respect everybody's rights in every circumstance. That's just a matter of morals. But as far as us in society, we're going to respect and love those who are closest to us, whether they be Black, white, Hispanic, or whatever. There's so many dynamics that go into respecting and valuing other human beings that an empty slogan like BLM, which doesn't even consider its antecedent, is not sufficient enough to make that claim. So the term itself, in my opinion, is corrupted because it confines human value to a particular set of people when it is in fact universal. That's the problem.
Okay, so this is who you're working for now, right? You're a graduate, so you have a real job. So tell us about this. Color Us United.
So Color Us United, we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and our primary goal is to fight for a colorblind society. So what we do is we do PR pressure campaigns against institutions that have gone woke. I'm not sure you remember what happened to the Salvation Army a few months ago, right? They got exposed for the wokeness, things of that sort, that they were giving their employees. They wrote a curriculum called "Let's Talk About Racism," and in that curriculum, they essentially said to their employees that they need to repent on behalf of the church for their racism. And that, and
Christian,
basically,
I hate
yeah,
to
you lost
stop you
my.
again. Can you start
No,
over?
please.
Sorry,
Yeah,
my
yeah.
internet went out
Yeah,
again.
that's fine.
Okay.
Fine. So yeah, Color Rush United is a 501c3 nonprofit whose aim is basically to fight for a colorblind society. We do PR pressure campaigns, institutional guerrilla warfare, as it's called, to go into institutions that have woke policies and convince them to drop them. Most recently, there was a big debacle last year over the Salvation Army, over their handling of wokeness, of their Let's Talk About Racism curriculum, where they asked all of their employees to repent on behalf of the church, so to speak. And so Color Rush United worked with a few whistleblowers in the organization, and we managed, along with thousands of other employees, to draft a petition that got over 14,000 signups. And we managed to get Salvation Army national leadership to retract their woke curriculum. So we're attempting to replicate this. We're attempting to replicate this in other institutions because we just believe that wokeness is a fundamental threat to the American way of life.
I think this is interesting. Sign the petition to let Un-American Express know that their race-based policies are evil and divisive.
Yep. American Express. We have a whistleblower called Nick Williams who just debuted his story on Fox and on our WebFest that we just had a few days ago, the National Zoom WebFest for Workers Against Woke Workplaces. And essentially, he was too long didn't read. He was fired for not giving a grant to a black lady, despite the fact that her credit was bad, because Amex has a diversity quota they want people to fill. They dragged him into a room, and they interrogated him for about 72, 74 plus days, and then fired him. Tried offering him severance package, said no. Then they went ahead. He filed a class action lawsuit. Now he's working with us. American Express done a lot of very nasty things over the past year or so in their pursuit of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But here's the other thing, though. A lot of people like those points. They like the points, like the loyalty bonuses. And so American Express is a hard nut to crack. But we've been mildly successful, I think.
This video has been cut short to fly under the community guideline radar on YouTube. So if you want to see the entire conversation, go to one of my other platforms. The links are in the description. The best place to go is AllisonMorrow.locals.com, where you can support my work and become part of my editorial board. We have editorial board meetings there once a week where you can give me feedback from the week before. You can pitch story ideas for the week ahead. They're very small live chats, and so I definitely will see your comment and get your feedback. You also get exclusive content there, so definitely AllisonMorrow.locals.com. But whatever you do, don't stay here on YouTube. If you want the full truth about what's going on around us, you're going to have to go somewhere else.